Hi there, it's Vero or at Vero Bujo from YouTube and Instagram, coming to you today with a new video on embroidery in your bullet journal, or more specifically just embroidery on paper. I will be sticking this in my journal eventually. I do have a related blog post up on the Archer and Olive website that you should definitely check out because it has all of the information regarding all the different types of stitches that I'm going to be using for everything that I'm doing in this video. I'm using some paper from one of the Archer and Olive notepads that comes from the Into the Wild box, and it's still available, and I'm going to be using this yellow cardstock from it to put my little embroidery on. Now, of course, you could do this directly into your journal, but as you'll see later on in this video, there's a reason I don't do it straight into my journal, and that's because the front side will look good, but the back side will not necessarily look as good because I'm no pro at embroidery, so I don't really know how to make the back side look as good as the front side. If you are new to embroidery as well, then I definitely recommend sticking with a just normal piece of paper that you can stick into your journal afterwards. Now, the reason I'm specifically encouraging you to use Archer and Olive journal paper is because it is thicker and sturdier. And when you're going to be poking holes into paper, you want your paper to be a little bit sturdier so that you can fit your thread through the paper, but also so that it doesn't rip between the holes and eventually just create a random line down your paper, which is not what you want. As you can see on the side, I do have an existing embroidery style that I had originally thought I was going to do, but I didn't film that one, so I'm actually going to be repeating it on this next one. And on that one, you can see that I had some different flower designs, and as you can see on the one that I'm currently drawing on, we're going to be doing 3 different flower designs with different techniques, and I hope that you enjoy this video. What I'm going to do first is I'm going to use a pencil. Now, of course, if you don't want to use a pencil to do this and you want to just copy the exact same style that I'm doing, you can click on the printable that I have on the blog post, because you can print it onto the Archer and Olive journal paper and then basically use the dots as a guide of where to stick your needle so that you can get the most accurate dots. Next up, we're going to start using one of my needles, and I'm going to point the needle about half of the squares in width between each of the points, going up all the way along the stem. Then for the leaves themselves, I'm going to include about 5 different points with the needle so that I can put the thread through them so that it looks like a nice little leaf. In some cases, I do only 3 little points at the end of the leaves, but that's actually not enough, so I definitely recommend doing 5. For this first one, I'm using some blue embroidery thread. Now, if you are new to embroidery thread, you can buy this from your local craft store. It typically comes with 6 threads entwined into one, and for this I'm actually going to unravel them, and I'm going to use only 2 individual strands of thread to form the different colored lines of my embroidery. I think this is typical for most embroiderers. I'm not entirely sure, so correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it is mostly typical for people to use 2 strands. For this first particular pattern, we're going to be using a back stitch, and for the back stitch you're going to start at the base. You go up one, then down the second one, and then when you come up to the third one, you're going to go back into the second one so that you're not having any gaps between any of the stitches, so that it looks quite normal like this. When we get towards the leaves, I actually don't go all the way up the stem with the stitches. I'm just going to create some leaves first. So I'll do some stitches, then some leaves, and some stitches, and some leaves. And for the leaves, it's the same principle, but instead of going to your next dot up, you're actually going to come back into one single hole onto the paper, which is why I definitely need to have sturdy paper stock. This is 160 GSM, which is definitely the minimum that I recommend because otherwise it's not sturdy enough. As you can see, sometimes when I run out of thread, I'm just going to replace it and continue going up, and you'll start to see that this leaf is forming into a very nice one. And sometimes you'll see the back of the paper so that you can have an idea of what it looks like on the back. Now for this particular one, I think it looks pretty good in the front and at the back, but for the subsequent ones, I don't think they all look as nice on the back. I'm also just going to use some scissors to cut off the excess thread on the back so that it doesn't look too messy. And I'm going to move on to the next flower. I'm going to be using this very light green thread. You might not be able to tell that it is green, but it is actually green. And I'm going to do the same thing again by poking some holes into the page. I'm going to be using a different type of stitch for this one, although I think on camera you might not be able to tell that it's quite different. The idea for this one is you're just going to kind of go up and down in through all the holes, so you have a gap between each of the stitches. And then what you're going to do at the end is you're going to come back through the stitches, and it's going to look like like this. This particular style is called the whipped running stitch. Again, check out my blog post to find all of the details for that particular stitch, for the names and exactly how they work. I think I've included like pretty accurate photos of what they should look like, so I hope that helps you out. I'm also including some little leaves, and they're just kind of like the back stitch method of just poking it through the hole. It's not a very big leaf, it's just like a one line stitch, which I thought was a very nice effect. I mean, it's not very visible, especially with the color thread that I chose. I'm also going to start with some additional flowers. Now for this one, before we even get started, I'm going to poke the holes, and the holes, it's just going to be one hole at the edge of each of the little petals this time, not like several different pokes like I did for the previous leaves, because I'm going to be using a different stitch for those flowers, which you'll see in just a moment. We're going to be using the lazy daisy stitch. The idea is you make a little loop, you go in through one hole, back down into the same hole, and then you're going to come out through the third hole and stitch it to the paper. Now I don't know if that made any sense because I don't have the terminology for embroidery, but again, I hope this video is at least helping you understand what I'm doing, and if it doesn't, then definitely go check out the blog post. And so I'm going to do a couple of these along the original green ones so that they look like some really nice little lavender flowers, I guess you could call it, and then we're going to move on. One thing I'll mention is for the lazy daisy stitch, don't pull the thread too tight, otherwise you'll lose the little loopy thing of the actual stitch, which is the effect that you're actually trying to achieve for this one. So try not to pull too tight so that you do leave the loop. Flower, we are going to be using yet again a different stitch for the stem of the flower, and that stem is going to be a chain stitch. So again, blog post for the details, but the chain stitch is pretty easy. It's kind of like the lazy daisy, but it goes in a single line instead. Again, apologies for my terminology, I do not have the terminology for embroidery. Contrary to the lazy daisy where you're sticking the loop down by putting the thread inside the loop then outside the loop through the same hole, for the chain stitch you're going to loop through the same side. So you do your loop, you come up through the next hole, and when you're going to go back down through that same hole, instead of going on the other side, you go on the same side as your first stitch that came through the loop. I hope that made sense. Then at the very end, you're going to do exactly like the lazy daisy, and you're going to secure the last loop by going in through the loop and then back down, but on the other side of the thread through the hole. I hope that made sense. Now next up, what you're going to see me do is I'm going to stick some tape down onto the embroidery that I've already done. Now you don't have to do this. The reason I'm doing this is because it's getting really fiddly and the thread that I'm using is small and it's kind of falling apart and it's just kind of going all over the place, so I always have to get new thread, and that's why I wanted to stick down so I'm not like losing everything all the time. I'm actually going to put tape at the very end, so I wouldn't necessarily recommend putting tape right now. You might want to wait till the end. When we do the whole length of the stem, we're actually going to do a really nice little flower. I guess you would call it a sunflower, and for this one we're going to do the same thing with a lazy daisy, except for it's going to be tighter. So it's going to form like a really nice round circle, and again I always have poke holes into the page so that I have the placement of each of my areas where I'm going to put my needle through, so that I can have the stitches ready so that I don't have to poke them and figure out where the hole goes afterwards. Here's kind of like another day, so we're filming during the daytime, which is actually a little bit easier for me, and you can see what I mean by the lazy daisy going round. So it's a lot tighter, it's a lot closer together, but the flower petals are actually quite large in size, which I think is really nice to see, and I really like how this one turns out. Now of course I'm not perfect at embroidery, but I think it looks pretty great. And then I'm just going to add a little pink center of the sunflower in the middle. I know sunflowers don't have a pink center, but I'm working with the colors that I have. Next up, I'm going to be doing the leaf for the sunflower, and the leaf is actually going to be, yet again, a different kind of stitch. Now, the stitch that I'm using for the leaf is called the side feather stitch. For the side feather stitch, you're going to use the similar technique as always, but instead of going back through the same hole to do a loop, you're going to go through the bottom hole to do the loop, and then you're going to come out through the third hole on the top, and then you're going to kind of do another little loop going down. So it kind of looks like an upside down L shape all the time, and what's going to happen is you're going to create the top side of the leaf, and your bottom side of the leaf is going to be kind of empty. We'll get to that in a second. When you get to the end of the leaf, you're going to do kind of like the lazy daisy, where you're finishing it off by putting it through the last hole. Then I'm just going to use the simple back stitch to form the underside of the leaf, and that's how the leaf turns out, and you can just repeat that on the other leaf on the other side. Now we've come to the end of the embroidery section, and I'm absolutely loving how it's turning out. I think it's such a cool little fun item that you can include into your journal or into your long form journaling, bullet journaling, into a pen pal, for example. I'm just going to show you how I included it into my journal. First of all, I'm going to put some tape on the back to hold everything together, because even though the cardboard or the paper itself is pretty sturdy, I just want to make sure that it stays in place for a very long time. Then once I put the tape on the back, I'm just going to cut it to shape or to size that I'd like it. So just a nice little cute rectangle. And then I'm going to put it into my journal. So this is what the journal I'm using is. It's from the Into the Wild box. So it has perforated pages, and you can actually see one of the previous spreads that I did from like a different video, which you can check out on the Art and Olive YouTube channel by just checking out Vero and then Art and Olive. And here I'm just going to stick it down in this journal. So I'm going to place it in this corner. I'm going to pop in some pink washi tape, and I'm also going to write a cute little quote that says, "Flowers need a little rain to grow," which I thought was a very cute quote. So I wrote that down with a gel pen, and I just stuck that all together. And this is what the final spread looks like. I think it's so effective and it's so pretty. I really think that the idea of embroidery in my bullet journal is a really fun concept to do. Now, I will say that embroidery it takes a long time to do, and let me know down in the comments what you thought of this little art project, and I hope you give it a go. Thank you so much, and I'll see you in another video very, very soon. Bye!